Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of The Terri Cole Show. In this episode, I'm going to be talking to a guy named Doug Bopst, who was arrested when he was 20 years old and sent to jail for possession of a large amount of weed with the intention to sell. And what happened in his life, how that became a pivot. And he is now an award-winning personal trainer. He's authored 3 books. He's the host of the Adversity Advantage podcast, which I was on, which is how we met. But he is really on this crusade to inspire others to overcome their own adversity, whatever it may be. He was overweight and out of shape, but he was massively addicted to opioids. So he did a cold detox in jail. That was not easy. And his whole story is so inspiring. So I hope that you enjoy learning more about Doug and his story. He's got a short documentary out called From Felony to Fitness to Free that I think you would actually love. So I hope that you enjoy this conversation with Doug as much as I enjoyed interviewing him. Well, hello, and I am super psyched to welcome Doug to the show. Hi.
Terry, it's great to see you again. How are you?
I am great. How are you?
I can't complain. It's a beautiful day here in Baltimore, Maryland, and it's an amazing time to be able to chat with people like yourself and share these amazing insights to be able to help other people.
I love it. Well, I've been fully obsessed with your story since I was on your show. So I just want to get into it because I find your life story and sort of what you've overcome to be this, it's like the quintessential story of hope for others. So I just want to start with, how did you go from, right? You have a documentary called Felony to Fitness to Free. How about we start, how did you end up going to jail?
Yeah, I think it's a really good place for us to start because, initially you came on my podcast, which is called The Adversity Advantage, where I help other people use hardship, setbacks, difficult times in their life to turn it into something meaningful. And the reason that it's so inspiring for me is because I used adversity to my complete disadvantage when I was a kid. Like you mentioned, I was in jail. I was in jail. I was a convicted felon. I was incarcerated on felony drug charges back in 2008. I was hopeless. I was suicidal. I had a horrific drug addiction. I was in despair, and I didn't think I was going to live to see my 25th birthday. And I think the main reason I got to that point is because I wasn't good at managing my pain or my trauma, and I chose to use it in unhealthy ways. And some of that stuff for me looked like, my parents got divorced when I was 5. I was bullied a lot as a kid, never had a girlfriend in grade school. I loved sports, but I was always cut from the sports team. So I had this what's wrong with me mentality that began to manifest inside of me, that I was always looking for a way to escape because I wasn't comfortable with who I was. And the first opportunity, I think, for me to escape was with food. I would eat unhealthy for breakfast. I would eat a bunch of pasta. I would eat pizza. I would eat a ton of fast food. When I was a kid, and I started to get a little pudgy when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, and I was having to buy husky sized pants. So now, I've told you, this manifestation of what's wrong with me had begun to grow, and now it's getting even bigger because it's why are all my friends still thin, and I'm getting a little bit pudgy? Again, why are the girls rejecting me? Why am I not good at sports? All these things. And then when I was 14, my neighbor was like, hey, I have some weed. Do you want to try it? And I saw all the kids that I thought that were cool, who were going to the parties and doing all the things, getting high and drinking and stuff. So I was like, I want to fit in. I want to be cool. I want to be able to change who I am because I wasn't happy with who I was. And I remember Terry taking the hit off that first marijuana pipe, and I felt that this massive monkey come off my back. I didn't have to worry if I was going to make the sports teams. I didn't have to worry if I was going to get a girlfriend. I didn't have to worry if I was going to be successful in school. I didn't have to worry about my parents' relationship. I didn't have to worry about anything. I could just be at peace. And you know this, once you take that first hit, it's you don't get addicted to the drug. You get addicted to that numbing feeling of just checking out and escaping. And that's what did it for me. And I started to smoke every single day to support this addiction that I now developed with the pot. I started to sell it a little bit on the side when I was a teenager because it's hard to make, $5, $6, $7, $8 an hour, whatever minimum wage was back then, and then spend that money on pot. Like it's hard to afford pot when you're smoking it every day.
And you were smoking a lot of pot, right?
Yeah, I was smoking a lot of pot. And then on my 16th birthday, my mom caught me selling some pot to one of my other neighbors, and she ended up kicking me out of her house, sending me to go live with my dad full time, which at the time was like a big slap in the face to me because I was much closer with my mom at that point than I was with my dad. My dad and I had a very tough relationship growing up, and we didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things. So I felt abandoned. I felt rejected. I felt betrayed, like all the feelings that would come from a boy, right, in that situation. And I guess, they thought it was going to force me to change my friends, change my habits, change my environment, like do all the things that at the time I guess seemed well-intentioned, but really just created more turmoil in my life, more trauma, more of a reason for me to use drugs. Ended up meeting new friends up at this new high school, and barely graduating high school, because all my friends and I would do was we would cut class, ride around, smoke weed, and that was like our life, right? That was what I thought was cool. And shortly after graduating high school, I started to experiment with drugs like cocaine. And I remember, Terri, like snorting a line of coke for the first time, and I felt like I was on top of the world. Because you can imagine this kid with low self-esteem, low level of self-confidence, just this feeling of unworthiness, snorting a drug like cocaine, and this crazy euphoric feeling comes that like, I can do this, I can do that. But the problem is, like, the euphoria that was created didn't match reality of where my life was and the choices I was making and who I actually was as a person. And I started to, at this point, also sell pot to make money, like to make a living, not just to support my habit, but to make a living. And I was picking up tons of pot every single week to sell it and to make money and to support myself financially. And then, like, as time went on, I started to develop more of a cocaine habit. And the problem with somebody with anxiety like myself and coke was they go about as well together as somebody trying to, like, lose weight and eat pizza every day. It just doesn't work.
Right.
So my anxiety, it was skyrocketing through the roof when I'm like, 16, or when I'm like 17, 18, 19 years old. No, yeah, I guess I was like 18, 19 years old at this point. Anxiety skyrocketing through the roof. And I didn't know how to manage it anymore. And so one of my friends offered me a 5 milligram Percocet that took the same monkey off my back that came off my back when I started smoking pot. And this is where, like, things got really, really bad, because I didn't realize like how addictive they were. I knew that obviously I wasn't putting kale into my system, but I didn't realize how quickly I would become addicted to these painkillers.
Terrifying. It's terrifying.
And it got really bad. 5 milligrams turned into 10 milligrams, turned into 20, turned into 40, to 80, all the way up until I'm doing 400 milligrams every single day to support my habit. Had to snort like 150, 160 milligrams every single morning to get out of bed. And it was rough. It was rough.
That's
like,
that's scary. That is so scary.
Yeah, it was really bad. And I mean, there was times where I would, like, literally cut up like a line of coke and cut up a line of oxy, and I would snort it. Before I snorted, I would be like, man, I wonder if I snorted this and I didn't wake up, like, would anybody ever miss me? And I just hit some really low points in my life, and everything came to a head. I was 20 years old. It was Cinco de Mayo, 2008. I was riding around with a few of my friends to make a drug deal. I had a half a pound of pot in my trunk, a couple $1,000s in cash in the glove box, and there was a cop running radar because Cinco de Mayo is one of the biggest drinking nights of the year. But, of course, I didn't think about that. And I also didn't think about the fact that I had a busted headlight that I'd been meaning to fix for months. But, doing drugs becomes like a religion. Yeah. Like, all you're thinking about is, like, what you're going to eat after you get high, who you're going to do it with, what music you're going to listen to, when you're going to do it, who do I have to manipulate next to get more money if I need it, who do I need to lie to about drugs, like, all these things, right, that go into this religion of...
Yeah, it's like a full-time job.
It is. It's crazy. And so the cop's sitting there running radar, and I end up flashing my high beams at the police officer. to hide the fact that I had a busted headlight, which I thought that was a brilliant idea. But really, like, we all know, like, what do you do when you high beam someone? You're alerting them that there's a cop or like running radar or something. So of course the cop pulls me over, and at that point I knew my life was over. I had this feeling in my stomach. My heart like sank literally into the pit of my stomach as the cop comes up to my car. I kind of stumble to get my license and registration, and he could just tell that we were up to no good. And one thing leads to the next, pulls me out of the car, searches it, finds a half a pound of pot, $2,000 in cash, puts me in handcuffs, and I'm in the back of this police car. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, how did I get here? Like, everything kind of came before me, right? Like, how did this kid who just wanted to be loved, how did this kid who just wanted a girlfriend, how did this kid who just wanted to make the teams, how did this kid who just wanted to fit in and not be made fun of, like, how did this kid end up in the back of this cop car? And it all goes back to the choices that I made in response to my adverse situation. And I'm not saying that everything in life is choice, right? Like, I mean, yeah, I think most of it is. I mean, obviously we have some horrific circumstances that happen that aren't our choice. But what I've learned just through different trials I've had after that point is that there's always choice in how you choose to respond. And while I wasn't like as aware at the time of like how to maneuver through that adversity, like with everything that I've learned now about mental health and addiction and anxiety and depression and stuff like that, there was still a lot of kids who weren't in my situation who didn't end up where I went, right? Yep. And ended up going to court a few months later. I was charged, and when I was arrested, I was charged with a felony, the possession with intent to distribute marijuana, which carried a maximum sentence of 5 years at the time. And ended up going to court, and the judge, like, in my mind at that time, threw the book at me. He sentenced me to 5 years, suspended everything but 90 days, meaning if I had picked up another charge, if I like failed a drug test, violated probation anyway, I could potentially have gone back and served the full 5 years. 5 years probation, 200 hours community service, all kinds of fines and drug classes. But he looked at me, he's like, Doug, you're young, you're 20 years old. This felony conviction is going to haunt you for the rest of your life. Because this is back in 2008, Terry. Like, this was back when things were way more stigmatized. Like, that was, I mean, it's still obviously a big deal now, but it was a really big deal back then. And he was like, I'll tell you what. He was like, I'll make you a deal. And he was like, I will, if you complete everything without messing up, no missed probation appointments, no failed drug tests, you do your community service, you fulfill your time behind bars, like all the things, I'll take the conviction off your record and give you a PBJ at the end of the 5 years. And at the time, I'm like doing the math in my head. I'm like, it's 2008. Isn't the world supposed to end in 2012? And I was also like, man, like, I don't think I'm going to live to see my 25th birthday. Like, I don't think this is even possible. But I was like, all right, well, what other choice do I have? I was like, sure, I'll take the deal. Right. And so I'm convicted of the felony with all the stipulations. End up reporting to jail about a week later. Or 3 weeks later. It was a week after my 21st birthday. And as I entered the gates at the detention center, I cried because I didn't want to go in. And when I left, I cried because I didn't want to leave, which is so crazy. And here's what happened. So when I get there, of course, I was feeling all the feels. I was angry. I was depressed. I was upset. I was anxious. I was everything, every emotion and thought of what goes on in jail that you could possibly think of was going through my mind at 300 miles an hour. Right. And I also had this horrific opiate addiction to kick. So my first few weeks in the detention center, I had detoxed cold turkey from Oxy, which was, it's like having the worst case of the flu like you could possibly imagine.
Oh, it's so crazy. That's really pretty inhumane. Usually they can step you down medically, but I guess when you go to jail, they don't.
Right. I think they'd given me like something to subside the nausea a little bit, if I remember. But I was doing so much that it was hard to stop that train, right? And one of the most interesting feelings that I experienced during that detox, which is one I talk about a lot, is this feeling of crawling out of my own skin. Like I felt like I was trying to crawl out of my own skin. And as I look back, I think it was like the old me leaving so that a new me could be like reborn in a way. And my soon-to-be cellmate was sitting there at the Scrabble table playing Scrabble, and he looked at me and he could just tell that there was something off where I was feeling super unconfident. I talked very slow and low, and he just knew that I just was not in a good place. And he's like, "You're going to start working out with me when you get through your detox." And I was like, "Dude, like BS. Like, if you've seen me, like I could have been a model for Pillsbury at the time. There's no way I'm going to work out with you." He's like, "All right, man." And not too long after that, I saw this guy worked out. And by the way, he looked like a more like jacked version of Brad Pitt from Fight Club.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And later on, like I said, I saw him working out, and he was doing thousands of push-ups, hundreds of pull-ups, running all over the place, like in the common area of the jail. And I was like, who is this guy? And not too long after that, we were having a conversation in the cell, and this is the conversation that changed my life. And I'll give you like the PG version of it. But he said, "Doug, like, well, what got you here?" He was like, asking me more about my story. And I said, my parents got divorced. Girls rejected me. I was bullied a lot in school. And he looked at me and he just said, "Quit being a bitch." And I was just like, huh? And he was like, you're blaming everybody for your problems, but yourself. He was like, "There's plenty of people that experience what you went through that aren't in jail, right, Doug?" And I'm like, yep. He's like, "You got two choices. You can be a man, look yourself in the mirror and say, you got yourself here, and it's up to you to find your way out. Or you can go be a bitch and go cry in the corner, say, woe is me, be pessimistic, blame everybody else for your problems." He's like, most people will do that. And I felt empowered, Terry, for like the first time, I think in my entire life, for like authentically, that I actually had the ability to change, started to believe it. And I went out and agreed for him to train me in there and started working out with him. Got down to do a push-up, couldn't even do a push-up from my knees because I was so weak. Could barely walk up and down the steps, and I felt incredibly defeated in that moment, but I was determined to at least make the most of it. And we ended up setting a goal when I was in there to be able to do a set of 10 push-ups and without stopping and run a mile before the end of my 90-day sentence. And with his motivation and encouragement, training me in there every single day, I was able to do it. I was able to do that set of 10 push-ups and run that mile. And it wasn't necessarily like the push-ups and the sit-ups and the running that necessarily changed it for me. It was really what they did as a result, right? It gave me some self-confidence I never had before. It taught me the importance of discipline. It taught me the value of getting comfortable, being uncomfortable. It taught me to like walk with this different swagger in the way I talked to myself. We were working a lot on like my mental game, because I was always telling myself that I was a piece of crap and I was a failure and that I was fat and I was all these things. And I started to really change the way I talked to myself, and also started walking with a little bit of a different like strut, had my chest up, shoulders back, where before I was always kind of slouched over.
Right.
And
almost trying to be like more invisible. But I have a question for you about this. How much did the fact that he believed that you could, like, here's this person who you don't know, he's your cellmate, but he's looking at you and he literally saw the higher version of you, where it was possible for you to take responsibility for your life, to get in physical shape. And you're an award-winning personal trainer. You have 3 books. You've got a documentary film. Like, this isn't just like, oh, look, you could do 10 push-ups and run a mile, right? You've run with this in your life. But I wonder, from a psychological perspective, how much did his belief and his caring about you enough to invest in becoming your trainer, how did that impact you?
It impacted me so much because I felt, other than my grandparents, he was like the first person to show up for me like authentically, and he had no skin in the game. Like, my grandparents were still family, so they kind of still, of course, had some sort of obligation, but like, he didn't. And Terry, I think sometimes when people, I think for me, like, I had my face so deep in the mud where I couldn't see, and I was just full of fear, full of uncertainty, full of hate, that I think what he did for me is he pulled my head up just a little bit out of that mud, and I could see just a glimpse of light, and just had a glimmer of hope that could help catapult me into like this next version of myself. And I think, sometimes in life we need somebody to believe in us when we can't believe in ourselves. Now, I think in order for us to take that first step, we have to believe in ourselves, but I think it can definitely help to have this person to push you. And
but this is also what you're doing for others, though. So part of it is that the positive ripple effect forward from your experience. Think about it. The kindness of a stranger, Because that's literally what you just described, was like the kindness. I mean, now he didn't stay a stranger, but he could have been a mean cellmate. He could have been anything. And you now have extended that kindness by sharing your success and your winning formulas for getting out of your own way, and not just physically, because so much of what you talk about is, yes, you have the physical training stuff that you share with people, but I think that the psychological stuff is an important part of what you also offer to others, because you've been there. You know what it's like to have no hope. You know what it's like to feel like this is literally impossible. And yet I'm still going to somehow try because this guy thinks I can. Because if my only choices are being a baby or a man, I think I'd like to be a man, right? I mean, or whatever the choices were. So for you, right now, what are you doing? Like, what is your intention? What are you lit up about doing in the world for other people? What motivates what you do now?
It's changed a lot, but I think there's still this common theme of fitness, Terry, where the day I left jail, I cried and I asked my cellmate, how can I ever repay him for what he did for me? And he said, don't mess up and pay it forward. And I hadn't never read a personal development book back then, so I didn't understand the idea of like being of service and helping others and that sort of thing. Right. But he gave me a workout plan that I still have framed in my place, so I never forget where I came from. And once I got out, I had lost a bunch of weight and gotten to a place fitness-wise where I wanted to help other people use fitness to change their lives. Mm-hmm. And that's been a big intention of mine over the last 11 plus years, is to share this secret, share the good word that I believe fitness is the most underutilized tool to help people recover from addiction. Now, I say tool. I don't think it's the cure. I say tool because I learned firsthand that there's a lot to be said for mind, body, and spirit, right? There's a lot to be said for the connection between physical fitness and mental fitness and emotional fitness and spiritual fitness.
Without a doubt. And
what I found is when I was having these conversations with clients, I could get to the root of what was going on. Like when somebody would come to me and say, I want to lose 20 pounds, I'd be like, well, why? Like, why is that important to you? And they would be like, well, I just want to like fit better in my clothes. I'm like, okay, like, why is that important to you? Like, and they're like, well, I just want to be able to go out with my friends and make sure that I look good in what I'm wearing. I'm like, okay, like, well, why is that so meaningful for you? Like, I hear you. Why? And they would say something like, well, the truth is I come home after being out with my friends and I just bawl my eyes out because I'm miserable with the person I see in the mirror. And I tell them, like, you know what? I've been there. I relate because I've been there too. Right. And then that starts a dialogue and it creates this bridge for connection. And because I was vulnerable and shared part of my story, that they have some level of trust and belief in me, right? Because there's relatability there. And I think that's one of the most important parts of being a coach, is trying to create some level of relatability with your clients. Doesn't mean that you have to have everything in common with them, but they have to feel like that you understand them.
Right.
And that's
right. That you've been there kind of. So what would you say? Like, people listening or watching this on YouTube and they feel like, oh, I'm just in a rut. Like, I'm just kind of like stuck in this rut. Do you have any actionable steps or ideas to help people like get out of a rut?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think this works for a lot of people that I know, and that is, I call them the 3 A's, and it's awareness. Like, I know you talk about the importance of self-awareness, right? Like being aware of like what it is, like what is that you're going through. Like, is it low energy? Are you just not sleeping well? Are you depressed? Are you stressed? Are you anxious? Like whatever it is. And then that's the first A. 2 is acceptance. And I think this is the most important one, because a lot of people get caught up in this because they feel this sense of shame that they're feeling a certain way, because the world tells you in a way that you should be feeling like 100% all the time. You should be feeling great, right? And it's not reality. So just accepting that ups and downs are part of life. And then the third part, which I think is really important, is action. Like for me, it's like, what can I do to make me feel better that's healthy and aligned with the highest version of myself? So could be as simple as just like changing your state and going out for a 10-minute walk. Could be calling a mentor. Could be listening to a podcast. Could be reading a book. Could be just sitting in silence and like gathering your thoughts, whatever it is, right? Take some action that is different from like kind of what you're doing, and then adjust accordingly. Now, again, like this is just from my experience, like trying to get out of like a time where you're feeling off. But obviously if you're feeling like anything more severe than that, then yeah, I mean, reach out to like a licensed like medical professional or therapist to help walk you through that. But that's just what I think works for me and many others, like just for these general ruts that we're in.
I love that. And I love the idea, because here's the thing about the action piece. It's so, that last A is so important, because so much of the time we're just spending so much time in our minds, so much time in our heads, either ruminating about like what we should be doing that we're not doing, like making ourselves feel bad. So many of us have this mean inner committee that just can't wait to tell you all the, like you were saying, your negative self-talk was pretty bad before you started really getting self-esteem through changing your actions, through changing your internal narrative. But it's like the action piece is so important, because what I see in my therapy practice is that it's almost like when we take a different action, we are consciously and mindfully pivoting, but we're also almost like putting the universe on notice, like something different is now happening. So I'm going to do something different so I get a different result, right? Because if we keep doing the same crap and we don't like the result, what do they say? That's the definition of insanity, is like doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So I think just the awareness, the acceptance, as you said, and the action this is just something, you guys listening or watching, you can just take this little tool away, and it's something that you can put in your back pocket. And if you're feeling like, I'm stuck, make it simple, right? What do they say in the rooms, right? Keep it simple, stupid, right? Because we have a tendency to complicate things. And if we can just keep it simple, I feel like it's just next right action and then the next right action. But what I find so, Doug, so fascinating about your story is there's so many ways that you could have not ended here. Right. You weren't here. You pivoted from a place that's very far away from where you are now, where respected, successful, helping zillions of other people around the world do what it is they need to do. And it's like those pitfalls that you fell into, but then you got yourself out of it. And it's like the jail thing, right? The actual jail thing, and then the probation thing. I mean, that kind of was the thing that changed your life. Like, would you ever have changed your life that drastically at that moment in time when you were 20, had you not been sentenced to go to jail?
There's no way. I mean, there's no way. I mean, there was part of me that wanted to change. I think a lot of people have it wrong with addicts, where they think that they want to be the way that they are. Like, I wanted to get out of it so much. I wanted to stop selling drugs. I wanted to stop doing it. But I think in many cases, like, our external world is a reflection of how we feel about ourselves internally. And I felt like crap about myself. I had the lowest level of self-esteem, and I had no self-confidence. So I was like, I've been managing my pain, my stress, my anxiety, my trauma, and all these with all these drugs for years. Like, how the heck am I going to be able to stop doing that tomorrow or the next day or whatever? Or I've been fired, or I've quit all these other jobs, or all these girls have rejected me. Like, how do I know that I'm going to be able to do this thing if I can't even get a girlfriend? How am I going to get off Oxycontin when I can't even get a girl to go out with me? How's that going to work? But when I was in jail, all the masks came off of me, and I was forced to be me versus me. Like, there was no more mask of addiction. There was no more mask of trying to fit in. There was no more mask of manipulation. There was no more mask of like anything else I was using to fulfill myself externally in an unhealthy way. And it really took me being completely naked, spiritually, mentally, and emotionally, to be able to rebuild myself from the ground up. Like, literally, like, I could not do a push-up from my knees. Like, I collapsed to the ground. And right. I just had to keep believing in myself, and I learned the importance of playing the long game. And that's one of the biggest drivers, I think, in my success. I learned early on of the importance of how things take time. I remember saying to my cellmate one night, I said, how long is it going to take for me to lose this weight? or get abs or whatever. And he was like, how long you been beating up your body for? I said, a long time. He's like, well, it's going to take a long time, Doug. And I was like, dang. I'm like, all right. But I just knew I was faced with two choices, Terry. And this is like a great point for people to hear. Like I said, like before I went to jail, like let's just say like 99.999% of me thought I was going to fail, right? From recovering from addiction. When I was in jail, let's just say that switched to 90%. But I still had so much more hope because of the tools I had found in jail that could help me manage my stress during that time. But there was still a lot, right? There was still like damaged relationships, shattered dreams, tension in my family, like all these things that I had to overcome as well, plus being on probation, plus being a convicted felon, and not staying off drugs at all outside of the incarceration.
Right.
And I was faced with two choices. I could spend my 100% of my day focused on the 90%, like assuming I was going to fail, and I would have failed. Because what happens when you assume you're going to fail at something? You either don't try, you self-sabotage, right? You end up not even giving it your best because you're assuming you're not going to make it anyway, and then you end up like not making it, right? But I knew if I just could lean in to that 10% and have blind faith and literally I developed this like whatever it takes mentality. Like I was literally like, I'll do whatever it freaking takes. And I knew for me, it was exercise, it was running, it was staying away from certain people in my life. It was taking some time to really like understand myself and why I hated being alone, why I refused to take care of myself for the longest time, like really getting introspective, like also just like kind of rediscovering like who I wanted to be. Like if I knew if I could do all those things every single day and focus on being better tomorrow than I was today, at least gave me a shot.
Right. There's something hopeful about that. Did you actually work an actual program, or was it more not really?
The crazy thing is I never worked a program. It's crazy. I literally just had this massive transformation while I was behind bars. And I also, I felt this immense amount of ownership like in my situation. And I felt like I owed it to my cellmate to keep going.
Yeah. Like the person who believed in you, suddenly there was someone else who would be let down in your mind or in your heart if you didn't stay on that path. Doug, this has been so inspiring. I want everyone who is listening or watching, tell us, where can we find you and all your stuff?
This has been awesome. I appreciate any opportunity to share my story, and especially with somebody like yourself who has such a deep background in not only addiction, but the mental health side of things. So kudos to you on that.
Thanks.
You can find me at DougBopst.com or on social media. I'm at Doug Bopst. On Instagram, I think I'm at Doug Bopst. On Twitter, TikTok, and then my podcast is called The Adversity Advantage, which is kind of how you and I connected. And yeah, I appreciate the opportunity so much, Terry.
Well, thank you. To be continued.
Thanks.